Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, "I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you." Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds.
For anyone following along, that was Daniel chapter 1, verse 3 to 17, if you want to catch up. Thanks, Ruben, by the way. Good morning, church. It's good to see everyone here. Can we get another round of applause for all the volunteers who've taken the time out today? I know we've done a lot of clapping already, but I just want to acknowledge everyone because it's not easy to get up here and do all this. So just want to acknowledge all of them and say thank you. Feel free to give them a high five after the service. They've done amazing. For those who don't know me, my name is Matthew, and I'm one of the youth leaders here at Ignite Youth, Right Baptist. And yeah, welcome to the Youth Takeover. It's good to have you here. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to anyone who's visiting us here for the first time. Don't worry, this church is not run by kids. So it's just as we wrap up the book of Daniel, in our series, Ken asked us to kind of finish things off with a bang. So we thought, hey, let's bring a bit of Friday night. And the crew have definitely done that. So yeah. All right. Before we jump into things, if you feel comfortable doing so, please join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the blessing and the privilege that it is to gather here in this place today. Let your will be done, Lord. In your name, amen. So we've been looking at Daniel over these past few months, and it's been a wild ride. Like, it really feels like instead of reading like one book that is Daniel, it feels like we've gone through 5, 6, 7. Sorry, I couldn't help it. Considering the number of genres, styles, and stories that is made up in the book of Daniel, and in light of the takeover that us youth have done, it only seemed appropriate to finish up Daniel looking at this book through kind of the eyes of a child, or the eyes of a youth, you might say. I don't know if child's applicable here. Some of you seem to call us children, regardless of whether we're adults or children. So let's go with youth. But being a youth is weird, though. You're on stage and you're all like, I can't wait to grow up. Oh, man. It's a lot more confronting when it's on the big screen. So that was me when I was a bit younger. But when you're a youth, you're all like, I can't wait to grow up. And I'm sure we've all had these thoughts at one stage. I definitely have. And then you get to the cusp of adulthood and you're like, hold on, wait, something must be off here. Like, something's not right. Is there some kind of Control-Z command? Is there a return receipt that came with this? Can I go back? Like, something's gone terribly, terribly wrong here. I recently got a credit card. I thought it wasn't my money, right? Like I thought that was the whole point. Like anyway. Uh, although what really has sealed the deal about growing up for me was at Ignite Youth one of the weeks, where I have the privilege and blessing of leading the youth boys here at Ride. But one night, I do remember joining in on the conversation once and talking about high school and what life was like back then. And I remember telling them about how my first smartphone was an iPhone 5. Remember that? Remember that little thing when they had home buttons? And one of the boys looks me dead in the eye and goes, "Oh my gosh, you are an unk, bro." Um, for those who don't know what unk means, it's short for uncle. Um, but that one really cut. I will not lie. So yeah, I took a bit of a hit there. And then Brett came along. So Brett's now the uncle here. Where is he? Love you, man. But speaking of being a youth, as we read in Daniel chapter 1, that Ruben read for us so amazingly, we're taken back to when Daniel was first captured and dragged off to a foreign nation. And he effectively had his home burned to the ground. Scholars say Daniel could have been as young as 13 or 14 at this time, not much older than a kid who had just started high school. And this is where we start to see him take some pretty remarkable steps for someone of his age and stature. Ken covered this already in the first week of the series, but Daniel doesn't let his identity get overwritten by the new name, the new environment, and the new food that gets given to him. It says that Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. Because the scriptures at the time didn't say that you couldn't take on a new name or change your environment, but it did say specifically not to eat certain foods. And what it does mention is foods that have been sacrificed to other gods, food that had been prepared uncleanly, and weren't following the traditions set out by Moses. And for someone like myself reading this, my first thought is, how on earth is this kid doing this? First of all, he's a kid, not like 10 years, maybe more younger than me. Second of all, he's also willingly locked himself into a vegetarian diet, which I don't know if I could do, even at his age. But as I was reading this passage, it occurred to me that God calls us children of God, not adults of God, which you can find examples of in 1 John 3, verse 1, Romans 8, verse 14, Galatians 3, verse 26, and so on and so forth. We can also find many, many examples of God using very young people in the Bible for his good works. David, who was predicted to be around 10 to 15 years old at the time he walked into the battlefield and slew Goliath. Esther, who was a very young woman when she entered the king's courtroom and persuaded him not to exterminate her people. God, who spoke audibly to Samuel when he was a young boy when the temple had not heard nor seen God in a very, very long time. And Asa, king of Judah, who was roughly about 18 to 20 years old when he became king of Judah and ended up outreigning 7 other kings of Israel who did evil in the eyes of God. And there's so many more here. And so in writing this talk, I wanted to bring the reminder through the book of Daniel that no matter what stage of life you're in, whether you're a youth, whether you've left that stage of life long ago, or you're about to become a youth, that God has called us to a relationship with him that is like father and child. One where we can retain a spiritual element of youthfulness that some of us, maybe we've lost it over the years, or some of us have yet to experience at all. So my first point, how do we do this? Well, what do kids usually start to do when they become teenagers? They test the boundaries. The rebellious phase, so to speak. And we do this because we're exploring for ourselves what's possible and trying to discover where the limits are and what's in that unknown that we have never been nor seen before. Often, unfortunately, at the detriment of our parents. One of the boundaries I tried testing a lot growing up as a teenage boy was, how long could I avoid taking a shower before mom noticed? Are you all laughing because you can relate, or I'm not quite sure? But I'm proud to announce I have since learned my lesson, and I know my limits very clearly, but When you're being rebellious as a youth or teenager, you'll go up against everything you're being told. Like, doesn't matter if it's objectively right, you'll still actively deny or disagree it because we're teenagers. When mom found out what I was up to, she obviously called me out for it, and it was obvious. It was very obvious. Like, even I could tell. But as teenagers, we don't fold easily, you know? So I stood my ground and I was like, no, 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 I don't want to what you mean. I can't smell anything. But that aside, let's have a look at what Daniel does. And note the wording here. In Daniel chapter 1, verse 12 to 13. Turn with me. Daniel says, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearances with that with the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." Here, Daniel is actively defying the boundaries and environment set for him. He's still in his exploration phase, and this is one of the key overarching themes of the book of Daniel. How do we live with our identities in Christ when everything around us is trying to pull, tear, wrestle us away from our relationship with God? And what Daniel's doing is he's rebelling against this. He's physically mature and wise because God's given him those gifts, but he shows us that his spirit and his relationship with God is still very much like that of a youth. So he pushes back using wisdom, but in the form of spiritual rebellion. And he goes, "No, I'm not going to lie down and follow what you say, because I believe that my God and my faith is strong enough to overcome this, and I don't believe that this is where the limit is. I don't believe that this is the boundary of where God can go." And what I'd like to remind us all of today is the fact that our body and the world around us has limits, but God has none. Like how Daniel responded, are we still challenging this boundary? Are we still pushing this limit? And is this something I must absolutely follow, or is there unexplored territory here? Test me. When the time comes for us to be judged, if I remove this thing, how will I end up compared to everyone else around me? Maybe it's not so much obstruction. Maybe some of us have settled into a neutral gear and are maybe simply maintaining, just chugging away, and have stopped challenging and have stopped growing deeper. And the common saying is grow up here, but to that I would say grow down a bit, man. Because I can tell you that there is so much more you have yet to explore, the ever-expanding mystery and curiosity that is our God, and there's an even deeper relationship with him that he has called you into. So step into that and don't stop. Of course, as a little disclaimer, when you're pushing limits, please apply the same wisdom Daniel does. You don't want to be pushing against pointless things like whether you should take a shower or not. This leads me to my second trait: stubbornness and fixation. Now, I think we've all had the collective experience of watching a baby throw a tantrum, and it's probably not a pleasant one. But if you've had the misfortune of watching a teenager throw a tantrum, it's quite a bit different. It starts because they want something, whether it be they saw it on social media or all their friends have it, or it's just all around them and they want it really, really bad. And when they're told they can't have it, it becomes the question of, but why? Why can't I have it? And then you give them the reason, but then their reason always seems to be greater than yours. Maybe there's a bit of tears, maybe a bit of yelling, and then eventually they give you this look. Kind of like I call it the look of doom. Like, and the monologue here is just you wait. I will prove to you that I need this thing, and I will do everything in my power to make it in your best interest to give me this thing as well. AKA, I will make your life as difficult as possible until I get what I want. Now, one thing we learn as we grow older is we can't always get what we want in life. We learn to let go of our wants and desires as we mature, and we learn to patiently wait for them. But there is something here in Daniel that calls us back to the power of being spiritually ignorant and stubborn. As our wisdom grows and we mature as Christians, we start to align our wants and needs with God's. Like when God calls you to speak life into someone at work, or start a community or a business that sows into the city of Sydney or greater than that, and that becomes a thing that we want to chase after as well. Now, in Daniel, he would have grown up knowing the scriptures as well, which had some pretty strict rules for what to eat and what not to eat. And these detailed God's desires for his people to be set apart from the other nations and build discipline. And Daniel shows us here in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, that he's adopted God's wants and needs as his own too. That reads, "But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way." This is what God wanted Daniel to do, because of the royal food and the culture of the Babylonians would have directly violated the laws of Moses, as we just mentioned. And because he was fixated on God, this therefore became what Daniel wanted to do as well. And what he shows us here is an insane level of stubbornness, but for God. It says that he resolved not to defile himself, meaning he steeled himself. He was not going to have it any other way. He put the foot down, similar to that teenage look of doom that I mentioned earlier. Like the monologue is, "Just you wait, I'll prove to you I need these veggies. And I'll do everything in my power to make sure you give me these veggies too." It sounds a bit silly out loud, but that's exactly the approach and the mentality that he had going into this. But I wonder that as we grow older, have we become too quick to let go of the wants and desires that God has placed in our hearts? The first part that we mentioned earlier, I feel is very well known, that we should align our wants and needs with God's as we grow and mature as Christians. But there is a second component here that I feel like is missing in the church. Do we still carry that same stubbornness of a youth that must have their way no matter what? Or have we become too relaxed, too swamped with the weight of the world that we've learnt to use fancy words like prioritizing when it comes to our faith? Mind you, when Daniel said those words, there were two hidden meanings here. Number one, he was rejecting a direct instruction from the king. And Nebuchadnezzar, famously, was notorious for some pretty gruesome punishments for people who'd rejected him in the past. Number two, this was also the same food that was being served to the king as well. This was the royal food. And so Daniel rejecting this was also kind of saying, "I don't want to eat the same food as you." And he knew the messages that these words were sending. Daniel knew this. So I don't think he had much room for his other priorities here, else he wouldn't have made that decision. My third and last point is a child's reliance on their parents. Let me take you to Daniel chapter 1, verse 15 to 17. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. When Daniel was going through this situation, he was obviously aware of what could happen to him. If his request wasn't received well, and if King Nebuchadnezzar took it as a direct challenge to his authority, things could have really gone sideways. And this is where we get caught up a lot of the time in our lives, because we're paralyzed by that fear, and we're afraid of the consequences of what might happen because of our actions, or worse, what might happen to those around us. Just like how his actions impacted his companions, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel must have also come face to face with the weight of his decisions. But there is something here that Daniel does that most of us can't, and it's his ability to rely on God with the full ignorance of a child, just like how a child will go and consume all the food in the pantry without a care in the world. They don't care how much time it took to go and get those bag of chips or how much it costs. They will eat it. Trust me, I've been there. Just like how a child might also chuck the dirty dishes on the sink, and after they put it down, it's no longer their issue because it's not their house, not their kitchen. But Daniel kind of makes these moves in a similar way. Obviously, not with the intention to ignore and take for granted, but to ignore and surrender. Knowing that it's not his battle to fight. And in a way, Daniel's being ignorant of the aftermath. And that he just goes and does. He tunnel visions and he goes and does what God instructs him to do. Because through his eyes as a young boy, that's no longer his issue. All he needs to do is follow God's commands faithfully and have faith and trust that God will sort out the rest. When we live as young people, there's so much we take for granted that our parents do. Because consciously, we're not even aware of to be honest, how much it takes to raise us, take care of us, make sure we're well fed, provided for. And yeah, it's taking it for granted. Like you could say it's being spoiled. But when we compare this to our situation, there's two key differences here to be aware of. And the first is that for us and for Daniel, we're aware of the consequences of our actions. We know the weight of the responsibility of our choices. So when we led to step out in faith, the weight of all this, the pressure of all this, the things that could go wrong, the other responsibilities we have to manage, all that's kind of swimming in our head. But despite all this, Daniel, having this pressure of, I could be killed, still trusts God and focuses on his calling. He's still testing. He's still pushing the boundaries like any stubborn child. The second difference here is that our earthly parents are limited. I mean, they're great, but they're limited. Resources and energy, like that there's a meter there. So when we leave things up to them, they inevitably get annoyed because, I mean, they've got better things to do, like gardening or something. That was a bit out of left field, sorry. But unlike our earthly parents, we have a God who is unlimited and a God who is always there. And this is who Daniel is depending on as he enters this situation. And reading the passage tells us that this was the right call. They looked better nourished than anyone else. They were blessed with gifts of knowledge, understanding, the ability to interpret dreams, and even found favor with the head chef and later King Nebuchadnezzar himself. Why on earth we would have a reason not to trust God here? Do we still posture ourselves with the same childlike innocence? Are we still able to leave the grown-up responsibilities that are out of our control to our Father in heaven? So as I wrap up and we come to the end of this sermon, I'd like to invite us into a time of prayer and worship. I'll invite the worship team back up, and as they play, I would like to encourage you to spend some time just in reflection, maybe over what we've heard today, what we've learned over the course of this series, and spend some time listening out for God to hear what he might be trying to say to you in this moment. The prayer team will be available, and if you'd like to respond, receive prayer, or just want someone to pray with, they will be here to support you down the front. Look for the guys with the yellow lanyards. Let's just step into a few minutes of worship and reflection. I'll be back up in a bit to close us in prayer.